Every child begins as a philosopher, eyes wide, heart untamed, a fire in the chest that won't let them rest until they understand why the sky is blue, why rules exist, why they must sit still when everything inside them screams to run. They question everything, not to defy, but to know. They ask why until the adults grow tired, until silence is rewarded more than curiosity, until the questions stop, and something in them dies. The world doesn't mourn it. In fact, it celebrates. The child is now well behaved, polite, structured, focused. But deep down, something primal has been traded, a spark for a leash. You may remember this moment in yourself, though perhaps not clearly. A faint scar in the psyche, a soft submission. You asked why, and someone said, "Because I said so." It felt like the end of a conversation. It was the beginning of obedience. So let's ask a question we're not supposed to ask. Why does society want that spark extinguished? Why does a child who questions threaten the very systems meant to guide them? Here's the paradox. Society claims to value intelligence, innovation, freedom, but it's built to reward the opposite. Not the fierce individual, but the compliant participant. Not the one who dares to think differently, but the one who performs predictably. If freedom is so cherished, why are we trained from the earliest age to equate goodness with obedience? Think of the classroom, where raising your hand before speaking is considered virtue, where knowing the answer matters less than giving the expected answer, where silence is golden and sitting still is divine. The child learns quickly. The way to be loved, to be accepted, to be safe, is not to be wild or brilliant or honest. It is to obey. This is not education. It is conditioning. Nietzsche called this the beginning of herd morality, a world where what is good is redefined to mean harmless, tame, controllable. We do not want children to become lions. We want them to become sheep that believe they're free. And as that child grows, the leash is simply replaced. From parents to teachers, teachers to bosses, bosses to laws, laws to culture. And culture, perhaps the most invisible warden of all, wraps its arms around us and whispers, "You're free now. Just don't ask questions that make people uncomfortable." So, we stop. But what if obedience isn't virtue? What if it's the beginning of our undoing? Let's pull the thread further into the invention of obedience itself. Because it wasn't always like this. Once, obedience was a tactic. Now, it's a virtue. And that shift, that was no accident. Obedience didn't fall from the sky. It was engineered. Long before factories hummed and cities towered, humans lived in tribes, fierce, raw, ungoverned. Survival didn't demand obedience. It demanded adaptability, instinct, the courage to disobey when it counted. But as we clustered into larger groups, something shifted. Chaos threatened order. Freedom became a liability. Suddenly, those who questioned were no longer seen as wise. They were dangerous. So, a silent evolution began. Not of biology, but of values. Tribes became kingdoms. Kingdoms became states. Each step demanded greater control of land, of labor, of minds, and control requires predictability. You cannot run an empire on wild hearts. You need people who follow orders, people who don't flinch when asked to sacrifice their time, their truth, even their lives. So how do you manufacture obedience? You begin with fear. You reward submission. You rewrite virtue. The warrior who once defied gods to protect his tribe is now branded arrogant. The thinker who challenges the priest is blasphemous. The worker who questions his place in the factory is lazy or ungrateful. And the obedient man? He is now the moral man, the good citizen, the model human. Nietzsche saw through this moral architecture. In the genealogy of morality, he argued that our entire system of values was forged in resentment, ressentiment. The weak, unable to overpower the strong, rewrote the rules of the game. They couldn't defeat the lion, so they painted his strength as evil. His instincts became sin. His independence, pride, and so obedience, once a tool of survival, became a religion. And that religion spread through commandments carved into stone, through prayers recited in unison, through bells that ring to start the school day, through laws etched into civic codes, all whispering the same quiet command: do not question, do not challenge, submit, and you will be rewarded. But rewarded with what? A paycheck, a reputation, a sense of belonging that's only yours if you behave, like a dog given treats for rolling over. And the moment you stop performing, the treats vanish. You're no longer good, you're trouble. And so we internalize the leash. We no longer need chains. The most effective obedience is the kind that polices itself. Ask yourself, when was the last time you had an urge to speak, to rebel, to question, and silenced yourself before anyone else could? That's not morality. That's programming. And it didn't begin with you. It began generations ago. Passed down like a cursed heirloom. Each link in the chain forged by fear, masquerading as virtue. But the cost is staggering. A society built on obedience cannot tolerate freedom. It tolerates safety, predictability, harmony at the price of depth. And those who feel the stirrings of their ancient, untamed selves, those who still ask why, are labeled misfits, or worse, threats. But Nietzsche didn't call them threats. He called them masters. And what the world calls good, he called the morality of slaves. Let's go deeper, into the darkest switch ever flipped in human consciousness, when the strong were made to feel ashamed, and the obedient called themselves good. Imagine a man who is strong, not just in body, but in spirit. He follows no one's path but his own. He speaks truth without permission. He takes what he needs without apology. In the ancient world, he was admired, envied, feared. He was the master, the embodiment of will and power. Now imagine that same man walking into a modern workplace, a church, or a classroom. What is he called today? Arrogant, toxic, rebellious, problematic, dangerous. Why? What changed? Nietzsche had an answer, one that claws at the roots of Western morality. He said, good and evil is not eternal. It is a lie told by the weak to protect themselves from the strong. He called it slave morality, a value system born not from truth or reason, but from resentment. The weak could not triumph over the strong, so they inverted the game. What they could not become, they began to condemn. The proud man was labeled sinful, the fearless woman immodest, the creative, the independent, the self-reliant were reframed as selfish, reckless, immoral. And in their place rose new virtues: humility, obedience, compassion. But only the kind of compassion that asks no questions. These were not universal truths. They were defense mechanisms. The noble type of man experiences itself as value-creating, Nietzsche wrote. It does not need approval. It says, what is harmful to me is harmful in itself. But slave Morality reverses that. It says, what harms me must be evil, and what makes me feel safe, even if it keeps me small, must be good. This is the lie that has shaped modern civilization. Slave morality flatters the masses because it makes weakness a badge of honor. It calls meekness maturity. It says anger is unhealthy, dominance is abusive, desire is dangerous. It doesn't seek to raise people up, but to pull everyone down to the same level of obedience and mediocrity. And the irony? The system tells you this is compassion, equality, justice. But it is often the opposite. It is fear disguised as love, control masked as morality. Where master morality says, I create value, I define myself. Slave morality says, I need others to validate me. I need society to protect me from those who are freer than I am. It is morality as defense, not as expansion. This is why Nietzsche's ideas are so often misunderstood, even vilified, because he didn't believe all morality was equal. He believed much of it was rot disguised as virtue, and he saw what few dared to say aloud, that the exaltation of obedience was not about virtue at all. It was about survival for the weak. But here's the most chilling part. Slave morality doesn't just imprison the strong. It convinces them they deserve to be in chains, that their instincts are shameful, their power unjust, their freedom selfish. And when the lion begins to believe the sheep's morality, he no longer needs a cage. He becomes his own jailer. You've seen this. The gifted student who plays dumb to fit in. The artist who censors herself to please the algorithm. The leader who dilutes truth into palatable slogans. This is slave morality at work. Its power is not in punishment, but in praise, in handing out gold stars for staying small. But some still feel the stirring of something older. They don't fit. They push. They question. And society calls them dangerous. Nietzsche had another word for them: free spirits. But before we get to them, we must ask, how is this morality reinforced, systematized, embedded into every corner of our lives? Let's open the doors to the three great factories of obedience: school, religion, and work. You wake up to an alarm, not because you want to, but because you're supposed to. You dress in a way that blends in, not stands out. You sit in traffic, in line, in silence. You perform, comply, smile, and you call this freedom. But what if these daily rituals are not neutral? What if they are the invisible architecture of obedience, designed not to serve you, but to shape you? Nietzsche warned that values are not born in a vacuum. They are engineered, passed down by institutions that no longer even question their origins. And no three institutions have done more to domesticate the wildness of the human spirit than school, religion, and work. 1. School, the factory of conformity. You enter school full of energy and curiosity, but you quickly learn that your worth is measured not by the quality of your questions, but by how well you repeat the answers. It is here that the first uniform is given, not just in clothes, but in thought. You learn when to speak, when to sit, when to ask permission to feel. Creativity becomes extra credit. Rebellion, a disorder. The bell rings like a Pavlovian command. Nietzsche would have seen it for what it is: a miniature state, a training ground for docility, where obedience is called discipline and conformity is mistaken for success. The child who dares to dream too loudly is told to settle, to behave, to prepare for the real world. But that world is already being built inside them. 2. Religion, the moral straitjacket. Religion promises salvation, but often delivers subjugation. It takes the deepest human questions, meaning, suffering, death, and answers them with commandments. It wraps fear in sacred language. Nietzsche called Christianity a religion of resentment, a morality born not from strength, but from weakness weaponized. It preached humility, meekness, the turning of the other cheek, not because these were divine truths, but because they kept the masses compliant. He didn't hate spirituality. He hated the lie, the idea that guilt is virtue, that desire is sin, that power is evil unless it comes from above. By placing divinity outside of man, religion strips him of his autonomy. You are told you are broken, and that only obedience will save you. Not transcendence, not growth, not becoming, just submission. And in exchange, comfort, community, certainty. But certainty, Nietzsche reminds us, is the death of thought. 3. Work, the modern cathedral of control. Now the child is grown, spirit crushed, morality outsourced. They enter the workforce, a new temple, dressed in corporate logos. Here, the rituals change, but the essence remains. Follow the process, hit the metrics, play the part, climb the ladder, but never question why the ladder exists. Work becomes identity. You're no longer a being, you're a title, an asset, a replaceable part in a machine built not for flourishing, but for profit. You are rewarded for playing along. You are punished for thinking otherwise. Obedience, once taught, is now expected. And if you stray too far from the line, these institutions close ranks. You're not just fired, you're ostracized, labeled difficult, ungrateful, delusional, dangerous. But the real danger? It's not the disobedient. It's the billions of people who never realize they've been tamed, yet some do. They feel the dissonance, the aching sense that something is wrong, that they were meant for something more than performance. Society calls them outliers. Nietzsche called them free spirits. But society fears them. Why? Because the free spirit is the one thing the obedient world cannot control. The free spirit is not a myth. They exist, always have. You've met them, perhaps only briefly. You knew them by the way they made you feel. Unsettled, intrigued, alive. They didn't flinch at silence. They didn't bend to norms. They didn't seek permission to exist. They made people uncomfortable without trying. Not through cruelty, but through truth. Society has always feared such souls, not because they cause harm, but because they reveal a possibility we're taught to suppress, that you can live on your own terms and not fall apart. To the obedient, the free spirit is a mirror, and the reflection is unbearable. Not because the image is ugly, but because it shows everything they buried to survive. Their instincts, their questions, their rage, their freedom. Nietzsche knew this tension intimately. He wrote not for the masses, but for the philosophers of the future, the ones with the strength to stand alone. Not lonely, alone, capable of bearing the weight of freedom without collapsing into conformity. He called them the Übermensch, often mistranslated as Superman, but closer to the one who has overcome. Overcome what? Not others. Themselves. Their conditioning. Their fear. Their inherited morality. The voice that says don't. The pressure that whispers fit in. See. The free spirit is not a rebel without cause. They are a rebel with consciousness, and that is what makes them so threatening. They don't reject rules just to be contrarian. They reject unjust rules. They don't crave chaos. They crave truth, and they're willing to be exiled for it. That exile is often silent. Society doesn't burn free spirits at the stake anymore. It buries them in bureaucracy. It labels them unstable. It isolates them with diagnoses. It distracts them with screens, seduces them with comfort, medicates them with productivity. Because to let the free spirit speak, to let them truly be, would expose the lie that obedience is not natural, that normal is not neutral, that safety is often just fear in formal wear. Worse, it might inspire others. One voice awakens another. A question becomes a movement. A refusal becomes a revolution. Nietzsche saw this as both terrifying and necessary. You must be willing to burn in your own flame. How could you rise anew if you have not first become ashes? The free spirit must die to who they were taught to be. And that death is lonely. It's easier to conform, to soften your edges, to tell yourself that comfort is enough. But what dies in the name of comfort is the highest part of you. So society shames the free spirit to keep the others in line. It whispers, "Don't be like them. Look how much they suffer." And the tragedy is, most believe it, but some don't. Some hear the cry beneath the silence. Some see the prison inside the praise. Some know that the cost of obedience is too high, and that even suffering is sacred if it leads to truth. They are not heroes. They are not gods. They are simply awake. But awakening comes at a price. The world doesn't welcome freedom. It resists it. Next, we look at that cost. Not the abstract price of freedom, but the flesh and blood toll of liberation. What it means to walk away from the herd and never look back. Freedom sounds noble until you taste it. It is not the fireworks of revolution, not the euphoric crescendo of personal growth videos. It is silence, disorientation, loss. The moment you step beyond the wall, you don't find paradise. You find emptiness, a vast, terrifying sky, and the crushing weight of self-responsibility. No script, no validation, no one to applaud, just you and your unbearable freedom. Nietzsche understood this abyss. He called it self-overcoming, and he never promised it would be beautiful. To become free is to dismantle everything you were taught to be. It is to murder the obedient self with surgical cruelty. The mask must be torn off, and beneath it, there is no immediate glory. There is only raw, unfinished selfhood. The world does not tell you this. It sells you the fantasy of freedom without the blood. But liberation is a grieving process. You grieve the roles that gave you identity. You grieve the relationships built on your compliance. You grieve the false safety of being told what to do. And most terrifying of all, you grieve the certainty that obedience provided. Because in freedom, nothing is guaranteed. You are no longer a product of the herd's values. You must now create your own. Nietzsche called this the ultimate act of strength, to become the legislator of your own soul. But what happens when the lawmaker feels the loss? What compass can guide you when you've burned the maps? Here enters Nietzsche's most brutal challenge, the concept of eternal recurrence. He asked, if you had to live your life exactly as it is, over and over again for all eternity, would you celebrate it or curse it? This is no hypothetical. It is a weapon, a mirror, a test. If you cannot say yes to that eternal repetition, then you are not free. You are still reacting, still obeying, still surviving, someone else's idea of who you should be. And yet, to say yes, to embrace your life fully, painfully, joyfully, requires more than courage. It requires amor fati, the love of fate. Not the resignation to it, not the tolerance of it, but the ecstatic, defiant love for everything, your flaws, your wounds, your failures. That is the price of liberation. You must be willing to affirm even your suffering because it made you, because it broke the chains. You lose your place in the world, but you gain your being. You become, in Nietzsche's words, the artist of your own life. But artists bleed. They are not celebrated in real time. They are mocked, misunderstood, dismissed. Only later, if ever, are they seen for what they are, creators of new values, midwives of the future. To choose this path is to choose exile over comfort, pain over anesthesia, truth over approval. But once you walk it, you can never return. The cage once seen cannot be unseen. The leash once broken cannot be worn again. And so you walk, alone, perhaps, but awake. Next, we arrive at the final threshold. What it means to not just escape society's grip, but to become something beyond it. There is a moment after the fire when the ash settles and something stirs. Not a return, not a restoration, but a becoming. You are no longer who you were, the obedient child, the well-behaved citizen, the hollow role. But neither are you yet what you are destined to be. You are becoming. And that state, Nietzsche reminds us, is the most dangerous of all. Because now, you carry no script, no dogma, no master. You are the sculptor and the stone. This is what Nietzsche meant when he spoke of the Übermensch, not a superior being who rules over others, but one who no longer needs to be ruled. One who creates values from the ground up, without apology or fear. Not out of arrogance, but out of necessity. Because old values can no longer contain what you are. You have become untamed. But this is not freedom as pleasure. It is freedom as weight, a terrifying liberty that demands you answer life with your whole being, not with prepackaged ideals or inherited beliefs. Every choice is yours now. Every failure, too. Society does not know what to do with such people. They cannot be marketed to. They do not respond to guilt. They do not bend to shame. Their yes is yes, and their no is no, without a single nod to consensus. They are dangerous, not because they destroy, but because they reveal how unnecessary so many of our prisons truly are. To become is to embody the truth that no one can give you meaning. You must make it. Forge it in the furnace of your own suffering, your own joy, your own relentless refusal to become less than what you are. Nietzsche's final call was not to safety, but to the edge of certainty, the edge of comfort, the edge of self. Become who you are, he said, not who the world told you to be. That is not a path, it is a cliff, and to walk it is to risk everything. But those who leap, they are the ones who are truly alive.